Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of System Link for Wednesday, the 15th of January 2025. I am joined, as always, by my co-host Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. Mike, how are we doing, sir?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you doing?
All good here, and as is often the case, we sort of record a System Link a week ago, and then there's just news. Just everything
A
seems to have
good
been
start to the
announced.
year. It's
Yeah,
kicking off.
yeah, it's coming in strong, right? And we've got obviously the Xbox Direct now confirmed, which we were talking about in the last episode, but also just a swirl of rumors around potential ports going to other platforms. Oblivion potentially also being remade. It'll be in our headlines tonight. We're also going to be deep diving into those ports, what those games could look like, where they're going to end up, and potentially what this now means for Xbox's everything is an Xbox strategy. What this looks like, the classic red line argument that we hear from Phil. There are no red lines. The lines are blurred. So we're going to get into that tonight. And we're also going to be going back to our community question as well, which this evening was asking the question in our Discord. Do exclusives help you purchase or encourage you to purchase another platform? Are they a driver of those sales, or is it something that doesn't matter to you so much? So we're going to be getting into that when we get into our deep dive. Thank you again, everyone in our Discord community. Shout out to the Burly Bird Media Discord and all of you guys in there. It is always great to see you guys get so involved and be so passionate with your thoughts and sharing your opinions. So thank you so much for that. We're going to kick off tonight just acknowledging, off the top of the show, the Xbox Developer Direct. We knew it was rumoured. It's now confirmed. We've got, I believe, and I actually have apologies, I've actually now forgotten the third title. I know that South of Midnight and Doom are featured. What is that third game? I know, that was my face too.
Well, I mean, what does that tell you?
I know, live fact check.
Um,
Because I know that
what were the two you said?
South of Midnight and Doom. We were expecting South of Midnight. In fact, I was hoping that we'd get maybe a firm date on that. I think it's actually quite likely that we would get... I think it's further along than we thought. I think we're likely to get a date on that one. And certainly for Doom as well. That reveal trailer looked pretty polished, as you'd expect from that studio. Id Software tend not to show their hand until they're ready. So I would imagine both Doom and South of Midnight are first half of 25. I think that's reasonable. I could see maybe a May slot for South of Midnight and a March release, getting in before the financial year for Doom. Doom being multi-platform as well, so having that as an Xbox Studios title really helps. Yeah, apologies, I've forgotten what that third title was.
Claire Obscure Expedition 33, which is why...
that would be why I forgot, because it was so verbose. Yeah, that just left the brain. And then a mystery fourth title. They did this for the two previous Xbox Developer Directs, which we had. Hi-Fi Rush was one of them, and there was something else confirmed, because Hi-Fi Rush was the Shadow Drop. And then... I forget what the other title was. Oh man, brain blanking here on System Link tonight. But that third title was rumoured to be a Japanese franchise, something that perhaps has not seen the light of day for a minute and is in fact going to show up at their Direct.
Yeah, and I believe it's it's an unannounced title, isn't it? So should be quite good.
Yeah.
Don't know whether we'll get a Shadow Drop. That might be too much to ask, but it would be interesting if they try and do something like that. We've not had much Game Pass news at all for the month, so I think the chances of a Shadow Drop is helped by that.
Yep.
It's been a lean month. There's not much coming, so but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes. And actually, continuing then that trend on the Xbox news cycle, we've got recently reported stock issues for both the Series X and S. Now, whether that's Microsoft scaling back their production, and we just haven't had enough sort of formal acknowledgement of that, or in fact that they are starting to shift some boxes, which at this point in the gen, I feel like any sort of major increase would be quite unusual to see this far in, particularly with rumours of an Xbox handheld swirling and also next gen being kicked off by Xbox in the not too distant future. But that was an interesting thing to track, given that on balance, console sales across PlayStation, Switch and Xbox are down in 2024. Those final figures were released recently. They've taken a serious hit, and obviously Xbox now, firmly entrenched in third place in terms of market share. So, but it was an interesting little side note. I think I saw that covered on Pure Xbox earlier this week, that there has been some stock issues that were notable enough to be reported.
I think the concerning thing is there were stock issues before Christmas, and potentially this is just like the stock hasn't been replenished, maybe, which suggests it is like a manufacturing problem rather than sales being particularly strong. Like 2 weeks before Christmas is not when you want to run out of stock.
No, not at all.
So it's that was on Amazon. I saw a few places reporting, so that was that was a concern. I've seen some people saying they might be using the boxes for the cloud to improve the cloud capacity, because
Yeah.
obviously that is all it is a load of Series X is running somewhere.
Yeah, I saw a report today actually that they're looking at scaling that up. There was something talking about sort of
Yeah, which
future
is
upgrades.
needed,
Very needed. And
improving
maybe
the
maybe
quality.
actually the sort of the rise of GeForce Now and also the quality of what PlayStation have done with PS Portal, it's kind of forcing that innovation. It's forcing them to dig deep and get that improved. Because it's clearly being used. There have been several instances when I've gone on there and there's been a server queue. So whether now they're in a position where they've got now enough people dipping in on mobile, dipping in on tablet and streaming, especially with their advertising push on it. I don't know quite how much that's moved the needle necessarily, but that definitely seems to be an ongoing priority for them. So any evidence that points to them actually investing in this tech and making it better, it is where the industry's heading. I'd love to still have my offline bespoke hardware. I don't think we've discussed many times how the infrastructure isn't really in place to support a completely cloud-only future.
That's a concern. You obviously don't want them to basically force people. It's way too early to be forcing people into cloud. And I saw I'm not sure who did the article, but in the US, they've basically only got the digital SKUs in stock, which is a concern and something I could see them doing deliberately.
To shift things that way.
Keep prices down and just basically stop manufacturing the disc consoles, because the next gen we're not going to have disc.
No, exactly. That they're gonna move away from that clearly, and they've evidenced that already with the way so many games now, especially special editions. You even see those at that end only including digital copies. It's becoming rarer and rarer to see them have a physical copy included. There's also the notion as well that I feel like now in this gen, people are only just starting to accept online only or like always connected games. Let's never lose sight of the Xbox One announcement and how that was perceived at the time, and how PlayStation used it as like a double whammy win for the PS4 transition. So actually, with that only now being accepted really and truly this gen, that's sort of fairly typical, games having big day one patches or being online only, that's only starting to become common vernacular. So the notion of it as something that's just streaming at this stage, I think and certainly from the sense of, like you described it, trying to force players to go that way, that seems very unrealistic at this stage.
Yeah, I think single player games that are online only, or even games that have a multiplayer component, but significant, you can play them single player, but still require you to be online, are still very problematic. Like I think The Crew had that issue, and then Ubisoft delisted it and shut the servers, and then no one could play it anymore. And they for subsequent ones they talked about patching it in. So I think it's something that I still don't think people would be comfortable with an always online console. Maybe one where you only have to sign in once every 30 days or whatever the Xbox One was the idea was behind that.
The check-ins, I believe, wasn't it? The online check-ins. Big Manny, Plug Socket in the chat. Good evening. It's good to see you both. If you're watching this on YouTube or listening to us on Podbean and Spotify, you can catch System Link live every single Wednesday at 9 o'clock right here on Twitch, where you can jump in, be part of the conversation live as we're recording, give us corrections and maybe help us with our memory blank research as we go. But also, if you want to dive in, as we mentioned at the top of the show, we have our Discord community and our community question, which we'll be getting to later in the show, dealing with our deep dive topic, which is around the Xbox ports. Sticking with Xbox for the time being, we also had the reveal and the report that Satya Nadella, head of Microsoft, was actually at a bit of a crossroads back in 2021 and was ready to either bin off the Xbox division entirely or go down the acquiring studios route. We then saw that obviously come to fruition with Bethesda and then eventually Activision. But it was interesting to know that that was on the docket. Xbox One had sort of faltered so much in terms of public perception, sales, engagement, that they were willing to wrap things up and cancel their investment in that arm of Microsoft. Now, fast forward to today, and they've got a fairly hefty investment to recoup. That $69 billion from Activision is no small bit of change. They've got to try and now reinvest back in the company. So this is just interesting to get that perception, especially when you look at, again, the idea that developers now looking at the success of certain Game Pass titles, or the notion of how Game Pass is structured in terms of their contracts and deals, etc., that some folks are now reluctant to support Game Pass, given Activision now being included in there, given that Black Ops has obviously dropped and been included day one. So it's a very interesting thing to look back not only 3 years ago at where they were at, what they were thinking about potentially, what there could have been, that alternate universe where Xbox shut down, but also seeing what the impact that Game Pass has had today, both on individual game sales. We talked recently about Hellblade and how that potentially has really flown under the radar as a result, but also that it's made some publishers a bit nervous to support Game Pass, given things like the Activision acquisition. It's a very complex situation they find themselves in. It's sort of very grey area, no sort of clear lines drawn.
Yeah, we talked about kind of the declining quality of especially third-party games coming into Game Pass. So there is a bit of evidence that people may be a bit reluctant to put their games on it following the acquisitions. But at the same time, you'd have to say if Xbox were willing to pay enough, anyone like Rockstar would put GTA 6 on it. If Microsoft paid them enough money, it would have to be an insane amount of money, but like effectively anyone would do that. So you wonder if something I thought about is maybe Xbox, knowing that they've got this first party catalog now, are paying less or offering less to third parties because they know they've got a pipeline of games which previously they didn't have. They had to rely on some fairly big third party games dropping on day one. At least you had maybe 3 or 4 across the year historically that we didn't really see last year.
Not in a consistent with a consistent delivery,
Yeah. So, and I think the year before we had like Persona deal and the Yakuza deal where you basically had all the Yakuza games coming onto Game Pass, which was pretty strong. We don't really have anything like that lined up so far. As for the other point, like you feel like Xbox One would have still made a profit. We've never heard concerns that, other than the usual Game Pass, is that it's not a sustainable thing, which I think is still a bit of a myth, because Phil Spencer always says it's making a profit whenever he kind of fields that question. So you wonder why they would be looking at wrapping it up, unless it was just like administratively such a pain for a company like Microsoft, who don't really specialize in, they're about business more than like consumer sales particularly. Yeah. So I'm not sure I buy that the solution to thinking should we wrap up Xbox is to like spend $100 billion on other companies. I could see them doing something like Tencent and like just investing in studios, but still wrapping up the console division of Xbox. But then you are just kind of an investment house.
Yeah, they're a third-party publisher at that point. I mean, that's
So I don't know. Yeah, I feel like I don't know how much of a benefit it is for them to still be Xbox and have these studios if they were that kind of pessimistic about where Xbox was going at that point.
I feel like you wouldn't make the investment, much like how I think, because the example I always cite when I think about this, where it's the other side, the misstep, was Stadia. What Google did with Stadia, where they thought they could just kind of money hat their way to buying a couple of key studios, didn't then allow them the scope or the space or have the release windows that would pump out that content on a streaming platform, which required you to purchase the games individually as well. They didn't have the pipeline, and therefore it wasn't sustainable. And that's been the problem with Xbox. They had that barnstorming year back in 2017, I think it was, Halo, Tomb Raider. It was a really strong sequence. And Forza as well, Forza 2. Great sequence for them. And then it was just inconsistent and, the odd title popping up here and there, but no constant stream. No, so if you think what PlayStation have achieved over the last decade, every single year, even in their leaner years, has some sort of regular release schedule, and their fan base is being satiated. So actually, when you come into 25 now, Avowed, South of Midnight, Doom, and Fable is a pretty good first-party selection if you space them out. If that's a hit every 3 months or so. And then you've got a couple of interesting third-party deals. You've got Sniper Elite coming in later this month, Atomfall coming in March. So that's kind of January, February, March in terms of like bigger titles dropping. They're not obviously first party, but you put, say, Sniper Elite Resistance, Avowed, Atomfall, Doom, South of Midnight, and Fable in a year. That's not a bad selection. That's a pretty good, from what we know so far. So hopefully now the main thing that's been addressed following that fork in the road they were faced with, that decision to potentially sunset it or not, is that they have now got the infrastructure and the pipeline in place with studios pumping out not only ongoing games like Sea of Thieves, but we're getting that regular drop into Game Pass. It's always been the problem for them. Poor management, badly managed projects, and poorly timed releases. Fundamentally, when you boil it down, it's those two things that have driven many of the issues that Xbox have faced.
Yeah, and I think the poorly managed releases is still a thing, unfortunately. We need a couple of years of decent titles coming out. You do wonder if part of that fork in the road, the decision was to go more third party in terms of releasing Xbox games on other platforms, and that was kind of the decision. Like, do we say we're not willing to do that and we'll wrap up Xbox, or do we say we'll acquire some studios and become more of a publisher than a console manufacturer?
We'll get to it in the deep dive, but it does de-emphasize the hardware, doesn't it? Because they're not system sellers, because the sales data isn't backing up these titles being system selling titles. It's
not, as we've said, they're not making enough consoles. So bizarre. Like, if you're in third place, the least you can do is make enough consoles
to satisfy what you would hope would be some demand for that.
To suggest they're not that interested in selling the boxes.
Right. So it does make you question sort of, where is this heading? They've committed to a next gen console that we know we're getting at least one more. What that looks like. I think really, and I know we've covered perhaps some things that we wanted to see from next gen, but I've kind of been thinking as well that one of the biggest issues for me with Xbox this generation was, I think, the feeling of it being very iterative. The Series X feels like an Xbox One X Pro. It feels like a mid-gen upgrade. PS5 to PS4, across the controller, the UI, the feature set, and the games, felt like, even though there was quite an extended cross-gen period, probably owing quite a bit to COVID, and the way the industry's heading as well, just a lot of like cross-play and all of those things, it was a lot of that going on, but I still feel like, on balance, looking back now, PS5 felt like a bigger jump from PS4 than Series X did from Xbox One. And I think if Xbox want to capture excitement, saying that everything is an Xbox, you can access our ecosystem anywhere, even on rival platforms with certain titles being ported, make the console experience you're going to put out worth the upgrade. Give me a new controller, even though the controller's great. Give me a new controller. Give me a new UI. Make it feel like you've got something that's a real investment, and then have your cake and eat it too. Then have Master Chief Collection on Switch. Then have, your streaming stick that eventually will be, that Chromecast style device, if that's where they're going. Have your handheld. As long as I think you're rooting your high end, your core user base, being satisfied and invested in a platform that feels like an upgrade, a proper step up, not just an iterative step. That's the issue I think that they face. And then you couple that with their inconsistent pipeline and poorly managed projects, they have a lot of work to do. Cool looking games does not mitigate the issues that we have seen from them over these last 18 months, 2 years.
But then if fundamentally they don't care about selling consoles,
right,
then there's no, maybe this is why we've got the Series X that we've got. I forget the guy's name who's now head of like the designing the next console. He designed the Series X and everyone raves about the Series X and how good it is, but like you say, it is iterative. It feels like a Microsoft product because it's almost like it's kind of business like. It's not fun. It's a very, just like, I don't really want to say serious, but it's pretty dull, isn't it? As it looks nice, but very reliable, not very interesting, not very innovative.
No frills.
Other than some of the software, quick resume and all that stuff. Yeah. The handheld is the one I think that will help differentiate, but equally there are other competing handhelds out there now, and with those having, basically PC operating systems on, it's going to be hard for them to stand out. And I don't see them, although I think there's been rumors of kind of refined controllers. I don't see them doing anything unique to the extent that we see PlayStation and Nintendo doing now. I think that is too risky. They tried it with the Xbox One and they tried it with Connect, and they lost a load of money over it. So I don't think
Bit
we'll
more
see
risk
that
averse,
again.
maybe. And also, I suppose the handheld issue is that they're wading into a market now dominated by Steam Deck. So actually, that's the market they're wading into. Switch has always been its own thing. So Nintendo are their own thing. Like you can't factor them into that conversation. Xbox coming in with a handheld that can't play Steam games, you would have someone then go, well, I just want to play my Steam library, so I'm gonna use my Steam Deck.
Well, unless they come in
So
with a handheld that can play
right,
Steam games.
and that then it's a question of whether Valve now in the hardware space and actively pushing Steam Deck, that is a big focus for them, is whether that's in their interest. Is it like much like Xbox where they want to have their games on other ecosystems because it's all money coming into the pot? So that is whether Steam need that. Do they need to have Steam on an Xbox handheld? Is that
Well,
valuable
but
to them?
then presumably if it's running on Windows, as in the back end, they could put Steam on it, whether Steam like it or not, effectively.
Right. Yeah, that people
Um,
can just do that effectively if it's an open enough
well,
platform.
or
Yeah.
whatever they can build it into the
Yeah.
operating system. I would
Well,
have thought.
one side of this that I think is perhaps we've been fairly and reasonably critical. I think like that nothing we've said I think has been said out of turn or is unfair to them. One little sort of a little silver lining, a positive success that came out of something recently that I hope will begin to silence or at the very least mute some of those somewhat redundant conversations about Xbox profitability with Game Pass and sort of the viability of the service, which is the recent reveal that Black Ops sales were actually up. These are sales, not player counts, not subscriptions. Black Ops sales are up 9% versus Modern Warfare 3 in Europe. And that obviously would be across platforms. The easiest comparison would be, it's a multi-platform release. You're taking Black Ops 6 and Modern Warfare 3. And despite its inclusion in Game Pass, on PC and Xbox as well, it is up 9% relative to the previous game, which means they have definitely had their cake and eaten it too. They've had people sign up, biggest sign up for Game Pass in its history, more players than ever before. So get the Game Pass side of it's one, they've got the engagement there. Retention obviously is a different conversation, but certainly in terms of engagement initially in the release and people jumping in, there was a spike there. But 9% increase in raw sales is a massive improvement given its inclusion in Game Pass. I don't think anyone could have reasonably predicted that there would have been an actual increase. If anything, I think people thought it was going to go the other way, that they would be cannibalized.
I think so. Although Modern Warfare 3 was badly received, and it must have been one of the worst performing Call of Duties for quite a while. So it'd be interesting to compare it against a good Call of Duty game.
Yeah, like the original Modern Warfare, maybe the original Modern Warfare reboot. I mean, of the 2019 one.
Yeah, like certainly, I think it is absolutely a positive. You would think without Game Pass, it would still be high, considerably higher than that. I don't know if it tells you more about the number of people that have bought it for PlayStation. Like I think there's various stats that have come out, like over 50% of Xbox users are playing Black Ops, or around launch it was really high kind of attach rate in that sense. But for the numbers to be that strong, you do feel as though it might say more about the Xbox audience size versus PlayStation and PC than it does about, loads of people are still buying it on Xbox.
Sure.
Because I'd be surprised if there are. We've also got this confusing thing with the Vault Edition upgrade. Like if you have it on Game Pass and you buy the Vault Edition, does that count as a sale of Call of Duty, or does that count as a DLC digital thing? So it's a bit of a grey area, and I don't know. Obviously, it only gets reported from one place, which is
and how that's reported. Yeah, I would reasonably think that sales refers to boxed or digital copies of the full game. That
I agree.
That would seem to be the reasonable interpretation of that data.
But in which case, either way, you're missing out on some nuance. Like if people are talking about the revenue for Call of Duty, does that include the Vault Edition upgrades? If people are talking about the people that have bought the game, does that include the people that are paying whatever it was to upgrade? But it's an interesting one, and I think we spoke last week about how apparently from the same source, from Chris Dring, he was saying that anecdotally has heard 80% you'd expect an 80% drop in sales
Mm.
from a game being on Game Pass, and then certainly, obviously, it's a multi-platform game, but you'd be surprised if it has been an 80% drop on Xbox for it to still have a 9%
Increase
increase
overall.
overall. But
When already the leader platforms were PlayStation, they had the DLC and the advertising rights for the last few games. So it just doesn't. Yeah, there's a bit of nuance there missing from that conversation, but just generally as a statistic, I thought that was interesting and definitely worth mentioning. We also surely have a Switch 2 announcement imminent. Nintendo must be seething at all of these leaks we discussed last week.
Tomorrow I saw
Mm.
that leak of the date was leaked as tomorrow, but it's just like I don't like that it may just be sprung on us. Surely they won't just announce it tomorrow
Yes, I
with
can't remember what.
no video lined up,
Yeah, I can't remember
like
what.
live conferencing.
Yeah, I can't remember what was done for the Switch. Well, because I remember there was like a hardware reveal and then there was a software showcase, and I imagine they'll do a similar pattern for this. But also don't remember like how much of it we knew in advance. Like, I'll tune in on this day. Like, when they announce their directs, there is precedent for them like announcing directs with only a 24 hours notice. That hey, there is something for that. But I don't know. I can't remember how they handled. God, my memory tonight. I can't remember how they handled Switch hardware
Yeah,
launch.
my preference would be they announce a direct and a vague about it. Obviously, everyone would expect, because normally with the directs they say we'll be talking about whatever
And we won't
Pokemon.
be showing. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I would like them to be deliberately vague so we all basically know they're going to announce it. But there's still a bit of, like we were talking about last week with the leaks and stuff, still a bit of mystery about it,
Yeah,
which
a
is
bit of
always
pageantry,
nice.
right? It's the E3 of
Yeah.
old that you and I long for. I think.
I don't want them to just shit out some high-res photos that we've probably already
Well,
seen
yeah,
via
and
the
even
accessories manufacturers.
even worse when like Xbox One X was announced via a Digital Foundry article. It was like here's the innards of the teraflops, and you sort of go, oh, there's no
Well,
excitement generated there. Like it's just
but it is. I think that will tell us actually quite a lot about the console, and because we've talked about it being iterative. If this is quite a I don't know, muted announcement
mm,
almost, it doesn't have the fanfare that the original Switch announcement had. It's more like, here's the next model of the Switch,
right.
basically. That will tell us an awful lot about Nintendo's expectations and how we should be treating the
Yep.
console. Like it might be that they don't feel it's enough of a. I'm getting ahead of myself here because I think I was quite negative about it last week about the specs, and I
Mm.
think most people are quite positive about the leaked specs. But I think it will tell a story if they announce it quite relatively quietly as to
Yeah, that
how
is
they're
interesting.
positioning it.
I think we're looking at the Xbox One X as one of the first sort of mid-gen refreshes that I'd seen, other than like a slim release, something where like the form factor and the innards were being upgraded. To have that just be a technical release, I did find quite sort of underwhelming. I
But
was kind of
but
like, I was a
uh,
shame. Um,
but as we've seen with the PS5 Pro, it's a hardcore,
mm,
tech nerd kind of purchase. That is the audience for the console is Digital Foundry
sure.
readers,
Yeah.
and it's the same with the PS5 Pro, which is why Sony announced it instead of it being a showcase thing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, nothing from home
so
enhanced.
I
It was Cerny, wasn't it, that did the reveal?
but I think that obviously Switch 2 is different, but yeah, it'll be
Well, that's it,
interesting.
isn't it? Yeah, it's Xbox One X was pitched as a mid-gen refresh and iterative. We're expecting Switch 2 to be iterative, but just the name of it suggests that there should be some kind of, like how much of a leap are we going to get? And that's the thing not just in terms of hardware. We know they're not going to be cutting edge, but it's in terms of what the console is offering, which is the same central issue we discussed with Xbox earlier. What is the console offering when you pitch it not as a mid-refresh, platform like they did with One X and Digital Foundry, when you are saying this is our next generation platform, which Xbox did with Series X, with PlayStation did with PS5, and Nintendo haven't done with Switch 2. So that
Yeah,
leads
and
into it being more iterative, I think.
and based on, like, I don't know if we actually want to discuss it here because it is a bit leakage, but based on the launch titles that have been rumored, like they don't kind of blow you away.
Mm.
There's one in there that I think will get people really excited, but the rest of them are kind of falling on third party. So I don't know. You announce a console and you've only got one first party game, for example, for it. maybe it's quite hard to sell that as like a big showcase event
Sure.
when you're kind of showing a 10-year-old third party game as like
As
the
the
reason to
other
buy your
title.
console. But
Yeah.
yeah, but who knows?
Well,
Can't rely on those leaks,
no,
can
we
we? Maybe.
cannot. And there is a very good chance that next week's System Link, we will be able to actually finally unpack that.
Great.
Not, I think that's the first time you and I will have actually done this, a live show, a podcast of any kind, while a console announcement's happening. And that's an interesting place for us to do this, I think. And also now I think just talking it through with you then during the episode here, the idea of the format with which it's announced, the level of pageantry and pomp and circumstance, like how much it feels like, this is something we're building up to, as opposed to just kind of here it is and just kind of plopping it out. That will be interesting to define, and also how much detail they go into. How vague are they going to be, deliberately so, to allow there to be maybe a follow-up showcase later.
But if it's coming out in March, which is also rumored,
yeah,
then they've got to tell us what it is. They've got to at least release the data about it afterwards. But obviously, we also have to remember that Nintendo don't do big showcases anymore. They do digital directs. So I think with the pomp and pageantry, I would expect them to say our next console announcement will be held at this time. Tune in online rather than just be like, here's a press release, or that's kind of the lowest of the low. The next is probably they announce it at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning that they're showing a video at midday or something, and don't give people time to do the live text stuff on all the different websites and all that stuff, and don't give people time to kind of get a break at work to watch it and stuff. So
we can expect it to be a silly time for us, I suppose, can't we? That if they're doing a worldwide unveiling. I want to just give a little shout out to a group of YouTubers, Easy Allies, who are one of my absolute favorite podcasters and streamers that are working right now on YouTube. And ages ago, probably over a year ago, Mike Huber, who's one of my also very well respected and one of my favorite personalities in that group, said that if Nintendo don't call it the Super Switch, then what the hell are they doing? Like kind of NES and SNESing it, and they have a storied history of terrible names, and I do actually think the Super Switch does make sense. I've always had that just in the back of my head. I do think that would not be a terrible choice, I don't think, for them, especially if it's iterative. Very easy to sell to parents at Christmas. You got the Switch, you got the Super Switch, so
I feel like in this day and age, Super Switch sounds a bit too iterative for me.
Okay.
I mean, it was quite iterative, NES to SNES, but I don't know. It will be. I think it would help if it is very iterative, and they want to kind of focus on the backwards compatibility and your accessories hopefully working between the two platforms. Whereas Switch 2 is a bit confusing in that regard for parents, and it is a very, very casual audience. So I agree. It's a good idea for a name, and I feel as though it would almost surprise me if they went with Switch 2 as a name.
Yes, I don't think Switch 2 will be what it's called. I don't think there isn't. Is there any history of Nintendo doing a number in the name?
Other than Nintendo 64, which doesn't work.
Sure,
but,
yeah. Sorry, I mean, like, that's badly worded question. I'm meaning more like, as in sequels, like PlayStation's 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Xbox to Xbox 360. I know the number jump doesn't make sense, but like, there's
like
Xbox
even though
One.
the Wii U was, I mean, it made less sense with the Wii U because that was a completely different. That wasn't iterative at all. It was completely different, and yet it kept Wii in the name.
I can speak to that as someone who used to work for HMV. The Wii U came out when I was working there, and I was running the games department, and trying to fucking sell that thing was a nightmare. It was so difficult to explain to people, no, this isn't an attachment. It's not like the Wii balance board or the fitness mat that you get for your Nintendo Wii. It's they looked at the tablet and the weird little box thing. I mean, talk about functional design. It's one of the worst looking consoles I've ever seen in my life. Just that weird flat rectangular blob that it was. I hope very much there is that clear definition, but I don't think it's Switch 2. I don't think that's the name they go with.
But possibly, other than on their handheld side, this could be the most iterative console. Certainly, the most iterative home console that they've released. Because it will potentially look the same, use the same accessories, run the same games, which we've not really had.
No, not
before.
At all.
Usually there's, other than NES to SNES, which was quite similar, like quite similar looking, similar.
They have confirmed though that the digital library and Switch Online subscription will be continuing forward, and I certainly an online service and backwards compatibility. That's new for Nintendo entirely. So actually, the idea of being able to get the new hardware and know that the N64 library was waiting there, that's helpful, in terms of transitioning that. But I do think it's going to feel like Xbox One to Series X instead of PS4 to PS5.
Yeah,
I think it's going to be more iterative in its approach, for sure.
But potentially, just given how limited the Switch One was, I think that might be enough for a lot of people. This is I don't want us to get bogged down on Switch, but currently, if you've got the basic Switch subscription, Switch Online subscription, or you've got your digital copies of your games, can you have them on Switch and Switch 2, or will you have to remove them from Switch? Like, how do the licenses work with the basic
I
Switch?
see. As in, like, maybe it'll be like a
because you've got the family plan.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you've got 2 Switches at the moment, do you have to buy 2 copies of the games, or?
No, I think as long as I'm signed in, and
can you be signed in on both?
That I don't know. That's a good question, because I suppose would it be like with like an Xbox and a PlayStation? I think Xbox, they refer to it as your home console. PlayStation, it's called your primary PS5. Same function essentially. They designate that as the main one, and then within the house, then you can, I think, share digital copies of stuff. But you still have to be signed in. Whether you could be signed in on 2 places at once, I don't believe so.
I'd be interested to know, talking about it being backwards compatible, if you can actually have the games on both consoles at the same time. Yeah. Or if you kind of have to transfer your stuff across. But
I don't know what that looks like.
Interesting.
But that we know that the online library is there. We know that the backwards compatibility is in place. I think actually, for me, it would be quite nice to know if they're going to support Switch physical cards. I don't think that's been...
Yeah, surely they will.
Well, yeah, I'd hope so. I have quite a big library of physical Switch games because the pricing's so good. I actually have several more than any other platform. Even though
comparative, but it's good because the digital pricing is so bad. It's not. It's no better. Well, I would say physical copies of Xbox and PlayStation games are still cheaper than Switch physical games.
Yes,
but compared to the online,
compared to the eShop, which never drops any pricing. Like, we've discounted Zelda to $48.99. You're like, okay, but I've got a huge library of Switch physical titles that I kind of want to have, because also, I definitely, Switch was the start of my online shift. I kind of decided going into Switch, and you could see all my games, my first 10 games were digital only. And I'd made a decision that this was my console. I was going to start going digital, even if my other, my PlayStation, my Xbox, was still going to have a disc tray. And the further and further I got in, the less and less I used it as a handheld, and the more and more I got frustrated with the pricing, I ended up just pushing for physical copies of titles. Never forget that All-Stars collection. They got me. They got us both. But
the thing is, it's not even close. Like on Xbox, if it's £5 cheaper, even £10 cheaper, or £10 more expensive, sorry, I'd probably rather just have the digital copy. But on Switch, it's like £20 cheaper to buy it physical, usually. It's like
I've
not
seen
even
some
you normally 35 quid you can get
35 between 35 and 40 quid you can get most physical copies of Switch games from, it could be Asda, I've gotten several from there
shops,
and that's pretty good. That's pretty great. I've seen a lot of weird £36 pricing in supermarkets and places like that.
And then, like you say, there'll be 50 on the eShop.
Always.
Or more.
Always.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is $49.99 on the eShop. That is a Wii game. That is game.
You said Zelda. You look at Breath of the Wild. It's probably still 50 quid on there.
Yeah,
it's just ridiculous.
Yeah. And isn't Tears of the Kingdom 60?
I don't know.
Pretty sure it's 60.
I think we may have looked it up the other
But
week.
Donkey Kong Country Returns.
Well, this is.
It's 50 quid. That's no. You can't price Mario Party Jamboree and Donkey Kong and Zelda Echoes of Wisdom at the same price. That's nonsense. I can't wrap my brain around that.
Oh, this is. I thought I'd just fact check this.
Live check.
Zelda Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Store, 60 quid.
Breath of the Wild, not Tears of the Kingdom.
Release date 3rd of March 2017.
Yeah, it was the launch title along with Just Dance 2017, wasn't it? So, okay.
So there we go. That's why. And if you wanted to buy that physical now, like you'd like to think it would be at that 35.
It'd be in that range, right? For sure.
Yeah. Because they never drop that much, even when they're that old Nintendo games. But it's you're not going to be paying 60 quid for it physical, that's for sure.
Well, precisely. Well, we've got now, before we just go into our deep dive, just a couple of last quick headlines that we wanted to cover, because I feel like we're kind of leaning to Switch, and I think a lot of this conversation is going to go that way as well. A rumoured Oblivion remake that's cooking up. I know, obviously, for you, that could be massive.
I've got it behind me.
Yeah, it's winking at you.
Yeah, but because it was rumoured before, it was rumoured last year, possibly even earlier, and now we're getting like considerable smoke about it. So I think it seems as though it's going to happen. Apparently, being remade in Unreal Engine, which will be interesting, because there's been a lot of push against the creation engine that they're using for their other games, but it's not Bethesda making it. It's like been farmed out.
Right.
So. Yeah, it will. They're also talking about changing some of the systems in the game to make them more kind of modern, or some of the things that people were annoyed about, which I'm kind of in two minds about, because I think some people like Oblivion because it's a bit more hardcore than Skyrim, but there's also a fan project which is Sky Oblivion, which is Oblivion made in the Skyrim engine, which they've been working on for years, and it's finally coming close. And
now there's rumors of this. I know.
Release the fucking Oblivion remake. It's just so typical.
Gonna get cease desist coming in there potentially. That's dangerous, isn't it? Well, also Xbox have shown a willingness to actually shift towards Unreal, even in some of their really big titles. You've got Halo now being developed, multiple Halo games being incubated under Halo Studios using Unreal Engine 5. That is their flagship franchise. That is their brand ambassador, and they're willing to dump off 10 years of development of the Slipspace engine to go with Unreal. So we've seen there's precedent for it.
You wonder if it's a case of they wanted to do a remake rather than a remaster, because Oblivion feels very janky now if you play it, animation and graphically. And to do a remake and to farm it out, maybe they felt it needs to be a new engine that non-Xbox studios are used to working with.
Yeah,
you do think that they probably could have got Obsidian to do it, because presumably Obsidian have worked with the creation engine with New Vegas. But I can understand why Obsidian might not be interested in doing a remake. But yeah, should be interesting. It's a bit surprising to me that they didn't choose a Fallout game, just given the TV series. Because I don't know when season 2 is, if season 2 is coming this year or next year.
I believe it's this year.
Because that maybe would have made more, like, especially if it was New Vegas, which I think the season 2 of the TV show is going to kind of reference. But again, potentially this has been in the works for a few years, and maybe it was before they knew the Fallout show would do so well.
Side note on that, I'm going to make sure that when season 2 rolls around, I've caught up on season 1, and then I watch it live with you, so we can unpack. I think that could be really interesting to make a little segment on here, because I think that's
we should do that with Last of Us as well.
Yeah, because I think we've got that very soon, right? It's going to be within the next couple months, season 2 dropping of that. So, final little headline just to mention was the Assassin's Creed slight delay, pushed back by a few weeks. I'm always on board with this, especially with these sort of mini delays, where they've then given a firm date. It's not like an indefinite push. They just say, we need that few weeks for that extra polish to squash bugs. Ubisoft have come off of a repeated string of either poorly received games, glitchy releases, and in a really sort of strange place, I think, right now as a publisher. they need a win. It's one of their sort of marquee franchises. So let it cook. I think that's a good thing for that series, and it will hopefully mitigate at least some of the somewhat unfair conversations that have been circling around that title. But yeah, no, a reasonable thing for them to do. I've got no concerns there.
Yeah, no, agreed. Lots of rumors about takeovers swirling all the time, with especially Tencent again.
So anything
Ubisoft,
that kind of anything that pushes, like we're pushing quality, that's a good play. I think by them, that's a good PR move. Even though no one wants to delay a game, no one wants to mess up with retailer and distribution, but I think it's a good play. So as we've kind of been talking quite extensively about Switch and where things are heading with Switch 2, we have now a significant number of Xbox ports, the biggest of which rumoured to be Halo the Master Chief Collection, coming to both Switch and PlayStation 5. It is our community question and deep dive topic tonight about the notion of exclusives. The question we posed to our community in Discord was, do exclusives move the needle for you in terms of making purchasing decisions? Does that affect which consoles you buy if a particular experience is exclusive there? We've referenced before as well streaming services. The great battle in the streaming wars right now, because there's so many, it's trying to encourage people to get on board with exclusive content. They're very much in the TV streaming space. They're very much all about, no, our show's only on Netflix. This is just Apple TV Plus. You can only get this on Paramount. So there's a lot of that going on in that space, but seems to be a lot of crossing lines and getting games in more than one place, even if it is just for an exclusive window. Now, I think exclusivity windows are going to become much more commonplace than they have been. So the central question we posed was, do exclusives matter to you when you're making a purchasing choice? And just looking back through some of the discussion earlier today in our Discord, we had Chris coming in saying, no, for me, no, because contracts end eventually. I still can't believe that Death Stranding ended up on Xbox. I think that's just, I never would have seen that coming. I thought they had that wrapped up on PlayStation for the duration. But Stray, Sifu, so many of those timed exclusives that maybe were on there for 2 years. Kena, Bridge of Spirits, made their way over as well. So I do think we're going to see a lot of that. Chris mentioned in the Discord as well, with PlayStation and Genshin, the contract did finally end, and then eventually it was added onto Series X and S. So
yeah, I guess there's the first party exclusives and the third party exclusives, and I think third party exclusives are a bit different, and also people get angrier about.
Yeah.
I remember the Tomb Raider.
Just going to say the Tomb Raider one was
dirty. It was not, even as an Xbox fan, and I think most of the people in the Discord, I kind of disagree with a bit. I quite like it when Xbox has exclusives, because I've been an Xbox fan more than a PlayStation fan since I had a PS3, and I haven't had a PlayStation since. And I like it when they're kind of fighting for their audience like that. And also it's good content. But for everything else, I feel like it's for third party, or a Tomb Raider especially. I felt guilty when they did that deal, because it was historically a PlayStation franchise. It felt underhand, and Xbox wasn't in a good place when they did it. It felt desperate, and it did really feel like a money hat thing.
Yeah.
But first party is a bit different, and you don't tend to have the contracts finishing. But that's why Death Stranding was interesting, because it's kind of a Kojima. Well, it is a Kojima production, and Kojima's been so intrinsically tied up with PlayStation for so long.
Metal Gear with Konami, again third party, but it was so associated with the PS2. So
that it was a surprise, and you just kind of assumed that PlayStation basically owned with the IP, which I guess they did initially.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think where I've kind of landed for myself is that I think exclusives do drive my purchasing decisions. They do matter. I like it. I think you said something really interesting there about like fighting for your audience. I think that's a really lovely way of phrasing that, because I bought a PS5. I held off at launch, and I bought it when The Last of Us Part 1 Remastered was announced for PS5. Knowing that it wasn't going to be on my PS4, I absolutely...
Yeah, and I think you'd always said that.
Yeah.
Because you kind of knew, because that's what PlayStation do, is they remaster their old games. I think you knew that it was going to come at some point, and that's when you'd dive in.
Ready to dive in. Knowing that there would then be a library of other things like Returnal, like Ratchet and Clank, like Spider-Man. Spider-Man is actually a bad example because that's cross-gen, but certainly those exclusive PS5 exclusive titles that I knew I'd be interested in, but weren't the system sellers for me. They weren't enough for me to jump in and invest, and that we've seen Xbox have struggled with that. There haven't been those things that perhaps should have landed in with a bigger splash to encourage that audience to dive in and take a punt on them. So or Big Manny in the chat just mentioning, I get why exclusives are important for consoles, but I don't get the sort of like big fear of missing out. Like that's not his sort of issue with that.
Yeah, I guess everyone probably has some titles that they would have to buy the other console for. But normally those games you already have those consoles if they're like first party titles because you're a massive Halo fan, so you'd have to have an Xbox. I know some of your friends are kind of on PlayStation now, but used to play Halo a lot, so there's kind of muddying of the waters there.
For sure.
I think something else to consider is, for me, who hasn't had a PlayStation since PS3, for me to get a PlayStation now is quite hard because I won't have a digital library on there. So I'd be starting from scratch. So for something to motivate me to get a PlayStation would have to be quite a big deal. And I think the new Naughty Dog game is the sort of thing that would convince me to do it. I was thinking about if PlayStation bought Bethesda, whether I would have bought a PS5 for Starfield. And I think initially I would have been certainly researching it and maybe saving up for it, but then the reviews would have come out for Starfield and I wouldn't have bought it based on the reviews.
Right.
Because it's such a big, like whatever, 500 quid or whatever.
Yeah.
For one game without having a digital library. So I think, like you were saying, Xbox haven't landed their first party games well enough to have people
to be system sellers
commit.
Yeah.
And even Indiana Jones, I think, could have been it, but they announced in advance that it was going to PlayStation, and it's
so
whether we'll ever learn what's really the reasoning behind that or not.
Sure.
I don't know, but it's the first kind of good enough game that they've released for a long time.
Certainly in its
other than maybe Forza Horizon.
Yeah, but in its critical response as well as sort of like general perception, I think it landed really strongly. That's where also I think there's that interesting dynamic of like, okay, they want to push the multi-platform strategy because they've got Game Pass, but they also want the sales. They don't want to cannibalize that, so they go elsewhere. They know that their console audience and their dedicated PC players are going to be on Game Pass most likely, just proportionally. We've seen that. But they also want to have their cake and eat it too, which means I just don't think this strategy allows them to be console market leaders and creating system selling experiences if they also then want to put those games, times exclusivity or not, on other platforms. I don't think there is a have your cake and eat it too moment there, unless you take the strategy that PlayStation take, which is that generally speaking, any PC ports aren't day and date unless they're multiplayer. They happen a year, 2 years later after the release. The console then becomes, well, you want, Helldivers, you want to get in there. That's a bad example. That's not first party. If you want Uncharted, Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man, The Last of Us, God of War, you want those games day one, you can only get them on a PlayStation console. Even though they announced it will come to PC, a bit like the indie port. The difference there, though, is there's a much longer gap between it. There isn't an established, I don't think, PlayStation audience on PC, whereas Xbox and PC have been synergistic for a while now, just because of the Microsoft connection. So I think there's less incentive for people on Xbox to jump in right now and treat Xbox like the early access. The big thing is Game Pass. That's what's going to keep me buying Xbox hardware if they continue making it, is because my PC isn't good enough to play all these games in their sort of optimum state. It's decent, but it will 1080p 60 it'll just sort of play at that level. I'm going to want access to South of Midnight day one on the best hardware I can get it for. And that day one access included in the sub is only on an Xbox console, but now we know that it could, South of Midnight on a PS5 Pro is quite an attractive proposition. So it's it's tough.
So if they said at this developer direct, which they won't, well, you'd hope not. If they said South of Midnight is coming to PlayStation 5 3 months after it's on Xbox, would you wait and get it on PS5 Pro, or would you have it in your Game Pass sub?
Great question. Haven't had to think about that at all. I think, and I'm probably a little bit biased here because of what I've said I'd like from Xbox. So this is definitely affected by this. I like seeing Xbox as like, well, Game Pass is your day one, it's your early access. if you want indie now, you can get it now, and its Game Pass is in there. You want that experience. It's not PS5 Pro. It's not the quote unquote best version, but if you want indie today, there is a route in for you to get it today right now. And I don't think with something like South of Midnight, I'd be able to wait. I think I'd be like, get me playing that game as much as I can. Now, something like Dragon Age: The Veilguard, I was happy to wait from its launch, give it that 2 or 3 weeks, because I knew I was gonna get the PS5 Pro, and I saved that game for that experience. So I never played the PS5 base version of that. I waited for the Pro, and I got that because I was happy to wait. I think there are some games that Xbox, this quote unquote, almost like sub-sellers, right? That for me would be South of Midnight, Fable. I wouldn't wait on Fable.
Yeah, I agree.
Gears of War, E-Day. I'm not waiting on Gears. I want in on that day one. I want that on my Xbox. Even if there is a Gears collection that comes to PlayStation at some point, and Gears E-Day is like 6 months later, I'm still playing it on my Xbox first. Forget it being in slightly better resolution and slightly better frame rate.
Yeah. I guess the thing where it depends on the game, because like a game like South of Midnight, where you're probably only going to play it once at least, like you'll maybe have a year and then play it again or something. For me, there is something about if you know it's going to say there's I can't remember what they've announced with South of Midnight, but say it's only 60 FPS on PS5 Pro, or there's a performance mode on PS5 Pro, but there isn't one on something like that. It kind of depends on that sort of nuance sometimes. Yes. I think something like Gears of War, where there's a multiplayer component, you could just play the campaign on Xbox and then play the campaign, the multiplayer when it comes out on PlayStation. You just move because you haven't paid for the Game Pass version. You've just part of your sub.
Sure.
So you're not buying it twice. But yes, it's single player games are a bit different because you kind of want to experience the story.
Well, that's where, historically games like Halo that have never appeared elsewhere, the idea of that. Well, my co-host from Burly and the Teat, my friend Adam, said to me that he would be all over Halo on PlayStation. He would get that and absolutely rinse it because he's made PlayStation his primary platform, and then one of his favorite Xbox games is going there. So that's Xbox's strategy validated in that sense. From a purely sales perspective, it will sell copies. Now, it's what matters to them, because it's not going to sell hardware. Putting their games that you would consider to be Xbox first-party titles on other platforms after X amount of time is not going to drive hardware sales. It might drive Game Pass subs for the early access approach, but it is not going to shift boxes. We've seen clear evidence that exclusive first-party games to a platform that are not timed exclusive shift plastic boxes. That is the strategy. So this is about engagement, and this is about sales elsewhere, not shifting hardware, because that just doesn't seem to be something Xbox are doing.
Yeah, they've had the chances. Halo Infinite, if it had been good enough, I guarantee you, Burly would have been forced to
get a Series S. He would have got a Series S. Yeah.
If it like everyone was playing it, all the streamers were playing it. It was on BBC that Halo was
out
the best
at launch. If it was a launch game and not Gears Tactics, an Xbox One port.
Well, this is so you see this stuff from Microsoft, and it's like, oh, the times are changing, games are cost more to develop, audiences are moving to mobile. If Halo Infinite had been good enough and it was their day one, none of that stuff matters. I think they also massively overstate that stuff, because PlayStation are still selling loads of PS5s. There's still a huge audience playing PS4 and Xbox One that will move when GTA comes out.
Yeah.
And then the PS5 numbers are going to go absolutely insane when GTA 6 comes out.
Yes.
And it's going to really compete for the best selling PlayStation consoles, I think, of all time. I guess we should actually talk about what the rumors were. So I think it was Flight Sim and what was the other game?
Was
in the original
collection, wasn't it? The Halo.
Master Chief Collection.
Yeah.
And then subsequently, Jez Corden was saying Hellblade, Gears 1, potentially in something else. I forget what the other game was. So it's still for me, like, then the internet went crazy, and it's like, because people seem quite sure, because we've had corroboration from a second source, not that that's the first time this has happened. We've kind of had similar things before that haven't come to fruition, but people are thinking, if like Gears, even if it's, an old Gears game, goes to PlayStation or Switch or both, then anything can.
Hmm.
And for me, we're still not quite there yet. We've obviously had the no red lines statement. We've had Jez Corden saying everything is going to PlayStation. Um, but until we get a first party current game going,
Yeah, not historical
other
stuff.
than like Indiana Jones, which is a license thing and
Hmm.
is a bit confused, or an existing
Yeah,
IP.
saying that like Fable is going to be day one on PlayStation as well. That's when you
That
can say
that's it.
that's
Then I
Xbox.
will,
Xbox is a third party publisher, right? Like
yeah,
that's
I'll
it.
eat my hat or whatever I have to do on the
Sure.
podcast, because I still don't think they're. If I was Xbox, I would want to do the PlayStation strategy, which is
Hmm.
just, people can almost assume that your games will go to the other platform. But for PlayStation it's PC, but for Xbox it's
Hmm.
PlayStation and Switch at some point. But you can't rely on it being soon. You would expect it to be at least 1 year, probably 2 or
Absolutely.
3 years later, and that's fine. And it works for PlayStation, and they still get some sales from the PC
I
stuff.
think a year's
And
okay. Give it a year, and then it's the
yeah,
second hit, isn't it? You know.
I yeah, but I don't know if, we talked about. I think we talked about this offline. You put Master Chief Collection on PS5, I can tolerate that. You put Gears Collection on
Hmm.
PlayStation 5, I can tolerate that. Even day one, even if they make it for Xbox and it's a day one release on PlayStation, for me that's fine. But then E Day and the next Halo game have to be big timed exclusive
Yes.
on
Yep.
Xbox. And don't say, I know on the Discord, someone was like, transparency. It might have
Hmm.
been James. Transparency is important, which I do agree with. I don't like it when they're, you know, this stuff we've had with Black Myth Wukong, where they're
Yeah.
just
And
you
if
don't
you
know
know,
what's
yeah, if
going
you
on.
know that you're working on the port, announce it. Don't make it like some weird extra thing like indie that was handled so poorly. Just out of the
Yeah.
gate, just be
Uh,
upfront. This is what's happening, but announce the
uh,
exclusivity window alongside that.
Yeah, but third party like Wukong is different for me, and I
Hmm.
think we should get more transparency about those things. But first party, I do not want them to announce that E-Day is going to PlayStation before it launches. It should just be, you know, whatever. In 2 years they say we're bringing it out on
Yeah.
PlayStation, because that the people that have played the Ultimate Collection, people that haven't played Gear since the 360, that are now able to play it on PlayStation, they will consider at least subbing to Game Pass
Hmm.
on PC or the stick or
Yep.
whatever is available when E-Day comes out.
To
And
be able to
that's
get in early, and
that.
Xbox Game
Yeah,
Pass becomes the day one, the early access to these experiences. You have to be in the Xbox ecosystem, otherwise you're not current. And there's an excitement, there's a draw to that that makes the sub exciting, and that's what they need, I think.
yeah. I don't know why, because we've had these rumors for a long time now. Why are the current Xbox games, the new releases? We've had a good year for new releases. Why weren't they there on PlayStation straight away? If that's the strategy now, why wasn't Hellblade there day one?
Right.
Why wasn't Flight Sim there day one? Oh, Age of Mythology was the other game, that Jez Corden said. Why wasn't Age of Mythology on PlayStation day one? If that's the strategy. Um, so it's still, for me, even if all these games come to fruition, which I'm not convinced about, um, we're still away from the kind of doom and gloom, new Gears E Day going to PS5 on
Yeah.
day one and stuff. I would be so surprised to see that happen.
Well, then I don't know
Still,
why you're making
even
hardware. Then
exactly,
that would be
yeah.
pointless. And that's where James Corden's comment about James Corden, he's a late night host. Jez Corden, his comment about it being everything going to PlayStation, everything going to be multi-platform, does not ring true, because South of Midnight, Doom the Dark Age is a bad example, but South of Midnight, Fable, Gears E Day, the next Halo, until they are
Avowed,
day and
like,
dating, then
Avowed,
yeah.
isn't a big deal. You're not selling hardware with
Hmm.
Avowed. it feels like the Outer Worlds, so you've got an
Yes.
audience that you could sell the game to that have played it on other platforms already, and yet we haven't heard anything about Avowed.
I
It's not
know.
in the list of games that Jez
Yeah.
Corden's talking about.
Why isn't
Starfield
Hellblade
still
out
hasn't.
already yet on PlayStation? It was
Well,
originally a PS4 game. It
yeah,
was. It was originally
and
a.
people were.
Yeah.
It didn't set the world on fire. The studio probably lost, or Microsoft probably lost money on it so far. For it to not even, have ended the conversation until now is bizarre. It seems like the
Well,
most
and it always looked
logical
like a
one.
PS4 game or a PS5 game. Like the
Yeah, it
Hellblade
fits. Yeah,
totally fits the Horizon God of War. It fits into that aesthetic.
it
And
could
that,
have been a PS5 Pro launch title, and it would have done really well, I think, because
Mhm.
it could have
Technical
been
showcase.
the kind of a showcase, which I guess would have annoyed Xbox fans, but would have sold
And it would have
quite
made
well, I
maybe
think, on
recoup some of their
PS5 Pro.
investment in it and validated the strategy. 6 months after that May mid-year launch, boom, there's your Pro launch. Right, exactly. That's just addressing James's point in the community. He was saying, yes, in the past I felt the pressure to buy another console because of exclusivity. I actually find it very difficult and sometimes pretty annoying. Try to be upfront as much as possible. So he's saying, I think I'm fine with them making something windowed, like a timed exclusive, so long as they then make it clear that it will eventually be on other platforms. Have that transparency. I think there's also value in sort of saying this right now. We can assume that stuff will happen eventually. Just announce your game, push for the launch on the one platform, the Xbox/PC, push for that. Then, because we're assuming, because there's evidence of that, then say, right, well, with a few months' notice, in 6 months' time or a year's time, this game's going to be coming out on other platforms. That's when you get to have your cake and eat it too. You've allowed your audience to feel like they've been looked after, whilst also then opening the doors a little bit later on for a port to go elsewhere. Plus,
Yeah, the worst. Sorry, just quickly. The
That's right.
worst thing, as we had with Tomb Raider, is when a game was previously multi-platform, or at least previously on another platform, and then it becomes exclusive. And this is what people were worried about with Elden Ring, if PlayStation were going to buy From Software or whatever. And Microsoft had the chance to do it. Whether it would have passed the competitiveness or monopolies thing, I don't know. But they had the chance to make, the next Elder Scrolls exclusive. Doom could have been exclusive.
yeah,
And they've chosen not to do it, which is kind of like the Kumbaya thing. Phil Spencer wants to be liked by everyone. Whether PlayStation would have done the same, I have very high doubts that they would.
In an alternate universe, if PlayStation bought Bethesda, I would bet real doubloons that Doom was a PS5 shooter exclusive because they didn't have a FPS.
Yeah, and that's the worst. Because if you like Xbox games, probably more accurately, if you like PlayStation games, because they tend to be quite similar, then you already have a PlayStation. And so I don't think there's a huge audience on Xbox. It's like, I really want to get these PlayStation exclusives because they just already have a PlayStation.
The reverse, I think, is true. I bet there's loads of PlayStation players that they've hedged their bets. That'll be like, fuck yeah, I want to play Gears of War. That sounds great.
Well, yeah, because we haven't had a new Gears of War game for a while now. So those people may have had Xbox Ones, or certainly a huge proportion of the PS5 user base will have had Xbox 360s. Because it was such a loads of people had Xbox 360. So especially bringing back stuff like Fable that hasn't even had a release for that amount of time, that there's a real possibility you would get people moving across, or at least, like we said, subscribing to Game Pass.
Yeah, because Game Pass represents the quickest way to get that game, even if the hardware isn't capable. And especially if you're cloud streaming and they've upgraded it, you're then in the GeForce Now territory where actually just existing with the sub. And on Xbox, it's a better value proposition because you're not buying for the game, not buying the games individually. That could be the way to get people in for them, and then they could have their cake and eat it too. Plugsocket in the Discord saying, yes, actually I love being able to add new consoles to my collection, because for him the collection was the important part, is having the hardware. With games exclusive to the platform that either have exclusive features or it's a version of a game that you can only find on one particular place. Big Manny came into chat as well saying, actually the opposite, definitely don't like exclusives. There are so many games I want to play but can't currently. Exclusives like Bloodborne at the time and God of War were the main reasons that I bought a PS5. He doesn't like the fact that even though he dislikes it, it was in fact driving his purchasing. So he might have a preference against it, but it was still actually making him want to buy it. You know.
Yeah, there's also the issue, like if you're a PS4 owner, which a lot of people would have been, and then you start getting things that are exclusive to PS5, you can't get them on PC even, and then you have to upgrade. Even though you're like a PlayStation fan and you're invested in the ecosystem, it still feels a bit shitty to then have to. You're forced to upgrade to the next PlayStation. You might have a high-end PC and you can't play.
Which is where like the cross-gen extended period, I think, softened the blow for that. A lot as a reaction to COVID and the inability to produce enough hardware. But that extended period definitely mitigated a lot of that issue, I think, because so many people were able to play like the next God of War, next two God of Wars cross-gen.
Yeah, and I have to say, for me, I think we're a bit like in two minds about it when the Series X came out, because it didn't feel like an upgrade and you could play all the stuff on Xbox One. But if there's a game that can run on the last gen hardware and it's being held back for on next gen only, that's pretty shitty. So I think and that hasn't happened much at all. So I think we have to be quite grateful that hasn't really become commonplace, because it's the sort of thing that has happened in previous generations.
Yeah, no, for sure. Davo in chat also saying, actually, no, I'd say it actually discourages me from buying hardware, because I know that I'll just be able to play it on PC later for a lot of these games, especially with their new strategy. With how expensive consoles can be, I wouldn't personally say it feels worth doing, especially when a PC is able to do the same thing and in some cases better. Yeah, I suppose it's that initial investment, isn't it? For a PC at that level, you're going to be doing a much greater investment than, say, even a PS5 Pro if you're at the top end of the console space. So, a really interesting conversation in the Discord today. Thank you again, everyone that weighed in on that topic, and it'll be interesting to see, I think, how the big decision, as we've kind of now settled on tonight, is this notion of exclusivity windows, and whether Microsoft are in a position where their upcoming first-party games are going to day and date on multi-platform, or in fact we're going to see an element of them using Game Pass as your first way in, your first early access to a title with an exclusivity window to follow. So, very interesting shift in strategy. 2025, bring in the Source straight away. Little reference to Gaz there.
Well, let's see. I'm still, remains to be seen.
Yeah, TBC
for me.
Yeah, very much so. Folks, thank you so much for checking out this latest episode of System Link. You can find us at Burly Bird Media on all of the various social platforms, Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and also on our Discord, where you can weigh in on every single episode of System Link. We'll do our community question, which ties in with our deep dive topic, and the video on demand version. You might be listening to this now either on Podbean, on Spotify, or having checked it out on YouTube. This goes up on the Thursday of each week, the day after the recording of the live show, right here on twitch.tv/Burly Bird Media. Mike, where can folks find you?
So I'm on the xboxguide.com. Hopefully I'll do something about this sort of conversation in the next couple of weeks probably, and we've obviously got the developer direct coming up, so should be some good content about that. And then I'm on Threads and Blue Sky as the Xbox Guide as well.
Lovely. Well, thanks everyone so much for tuning in and for jumping into chat and weighing in our community question discussion on Discord. We will see you next time.
See ya.